Welcome to the SEND Bitesize Podcast. I'm Arran Smith, the founder of SEND Group. The podcast you're about to listen to or watch was recorded pre-election in 2024. Enjoy. Hi everyone, welcome back to the SEND Bitesize Podcast for our new series, and I'm here with my colleague Beccie Hawes. Why don't you introduce yourself first, Becca?
Yeah, I'm the CEO of Cadmus Inclusive, Dame Rebecca Louise Hawes, if you will. Thank you very much. Absolutely national treasure and Jedi. I've got the best job in the world. I'll fight you for it. I get to lead a team of absolutely brilliant battle unicorns going out into schools, supporting our schools to support their children and young people that are vulnerable in some kind of way.
It's amazing. So I'm Arran Smith. I am a severely dyslexic adult and founder of SEND Group and a few other things like Dyslexia Show. And I've worked in the field of dyslexia for over 20 years. Now, we're back. Now, when was the last time we did a podcast, Becca?
I believe we played beautifully live from my conservatory over the COVID time.
We did.
And we've now been let out back into the world. We've re-civilised ourselves, so they're letting us go again.
I know. Well, the thing what it is I thought, we don't need to be in our homes. And actually, I don't need to play around with buttons for a change, which is a bit worrying because, I like to do that.
Yeah.
But actually, for me, we thought we'd do it in this amazing studio.
It's gorgeous,
It's gorgeous. I know. We've had a bit of an amazing day just looking at lights and playing with colours and stuff like that.
Yeah, and touching things.
Yeah.
Yes,
That's the thing, yeah. Which is actually one of the things that we often talk about because we've known each other for about 7 years,
at least
7 years,
at least.
And I remember one of the webinars you did for SEND Group was all about feelings, and you talk about the story of the Ofsted inspector being licked by the.
Absolutely, we had a beautiful moment where one of my tiny humans was busy doing their thing, and enter said Ofsted inspector to have a little look at the provision, and one of my beautiful tiny human beings marched straight up to the Ofsted inspector and just licked their whole arm. And you could just see on her face like, oh my goodness me, what is this? And I was like, meet tiny human meet Ofstedy person, little Miss Tweed Knickers as we referred to her. And it was just a brilliant moment of, actually, do you know what? You're in my space.
Yeah.
I need to check you out in my way. And my way of checking you out is via the medium of licking, which I think is marvellous because I do love a good face lick now and then. Yeah.
I think this is it. And I think this sets the tone ready for our podcast.
It does beautifully, does it? Some of our finer work already.
Might
I say. But for me, a useful place to go with our very first series of episode of series 2 is very much about, we'll talk about SEND, we talk about loads, special educational needs and or disabilities, but what actually is it?
And that's actually was my question to you, because for me, this term SEND, and I'm going to accentuate the D.
Ooh.
Because, I remember, when I was at school, being diagnosed as being dyslexic at age 9, I was called an SPLD, or a specific learning difficulty.
Oh, you were a splud.
I was a splud, yes.
Splud.
I could never say specific, and I'm pretty impressed that I've said it now twice.
Well done.
I know.
That's you done now.
Me done now. I'm going to go. See you later.
You
can carry on. But in 2014, we had the SEND reforms.
Yeah.
And that was part of the Children and Families Act. This is my I'm pretty good at this.
Check you out.
I know, I'm pretty good.
I feel you should have a jacket with elbow patches on because it's all going to be open university.
I think in one of our later podcasts that may come out.
Good, nice.
So, but for me, we now call it SEND, which stands for Special Education Needs and Disability.
Yeah.
And you added a little bit there, and or, didn't you?
Yeah, and or disabilities, which is
right.
an interesting take for me.
That's fine. Now, within your role as head of Cadmus Inclusive, you support lots of people, as you said, lots of humans, lots of little humans, and lots of big humans as well.
Yes.
All right. So if let's say. Let's look at the areas of school. So if you were going to a head teacher, how would you explain what SEND is to a head teacher?
I think the very first thing is, for some head teachers, we talk about the law itself and the statutory bit. So we refer directly to the SEND Code of Practice. And in that, it specifically states that a child or a young person has special educational needs and or disabilities if they require provision that is additional to and or different from what's typically received by peers of the same age. And I ask kind of foggy and a little bit woolly and a little bit.
It's very policy, isn't it?
Isn't it? It's nice. You sound very learned, my dear, if you can just round that off your tongue.
That's right. Yeah.
And it's also about if they've got some sort of learning difficulty which hinders their access to education. So within my service, okay, yes, that's what you're telling us we have to do and we have to say, but we go a little bit broader and a little bit wider, because we're looking at the fact that under the SEND Code of Practice, you've got 4 broad areas of need. So we're talking very much about you're going to have a cognition and learning need. You've got a social, emotional, mental health need. You've got a need that's physical and or sensory. We like a good and or. Yeah. And alternatively, we've got you guys over here. We've got communication and interaction needs, which kind of, that's nice and neat, that I don't meet any children who fit any of those boxes.
And are these boxes like driven from policy from above? Is that where these?
Yeah, and there's like a description of each one, so it's kind of like, oh yes, I can look at you and go, yeah, you fit nicely there, and you fit nicely there. But it doesn't work. This
concept of atypical doesn't work.
No, because actually, what have we got? Anarchy,
anarchy
which I quite like. I've got these wonderful humans who children are not designed for boxes. They are not a little bit of data. They're not a number or a figure. We have that to work out the size of our pants. We look at the number, we know it fits us and or not. Another cheeky and or there, see where I went.
No,
it's nice.
I can see this is going to be a topic, isn't it?
But for me, actually, some of my children and young people that we have the joy and pleasure and privilege of supporting fit a bit of all of it, and it's a chicken and an egg scenario, because you've got to work out what came first. Now, just to help everyone out, chickens and eggs, what actually came first was the velociraptor, because chickens are evolved from velociraptors, but I digress.
I'm dead sure a tiny human told you that one.
Yeah, it's just a really cool fact. But for me, for some children, you look and think, okay, so we're struggling with cognition and learning, but is that because your communication and interaction skills aren't where they need to be to access what's happening in this classroom? Or is it actually that your cognition and learning needs means you're not picking up on the subject-specific vocabulary, the social nuances of the classroom? So what actually is it? So for me, SEN is kind of looking at someone and saying, you know what we need to do with you? We need to hypothesise loads. Yeah. So I've got to look at you and I'll have a little hunch and a theory and I'll test it with my provision and I'll try and figure it out to see if I put this in, does it affect that or doesn't it?
Yeah.
And we've lost nothing either way. Because what actually happens is, okay, if that didn't work, we know not to do that ever again. Or, that does work, and that's affected that. So now that's leading us down this pathway. But I think SEND is a difficult one, because actually, if you think about it, most children at some point in their life need something additional to and or different from.
Yeah.
Because they just need a boost, or they have a tough time, or it's working out, is this a significant, long-lasting thing for this child?
Yeah.
Or is it a little moment in their life where a bit of extra something is required, and then we roll from there?
I think that it's really interesting, because me and you have spoken so many times about this.
Yeah.
And I love listening to you, because every time we talk about this, you change it
a
little bit. Because, of course, since we last did the podcast, policies changed, the world has changed, and it's interesting. Now, we are recording this podcast actually in Autism Appreciation Week or Day, and it's a bit hard to work out, because is it appreciation or awareness? But that's not what we're going to talk about. But you've talked about them 4 boxes, but actually there's no labels in any of them boxes. You haven't given me any of the labels that for me sometimes help some children.
Yeah.
So like dyslexia, like autism.
Yeah, and that's an interesting one, because where do you put those children then?
I know, yeah.
So I would go, okay, in the ideal world, nice and neatly, the specific learning difficulties are spluds as you are.
Spluds,
card-carrying spluds.
You
guys fit into cognition and learning. But actually, no, because actually, no, thank you.
No.
For me, sometimes it is actually, okay, the cognition and learning difficulties are driving this, but there can also be social, emotional, mental health needs attached to that. There can also be communication and interaction needs attached to that. And I think we've got to stop going, you fit here. Actually, your SEN is a wider, bigger, holistic thing, which is why we as a service have evolved our practices considerably. So what's our referral criteria? We ask that the child is vulnerable in some way, because everybody's vulnerable in some way. So I can't say no. And the people in my team, we have got distinct teams, but we're also multidisciplinary in that we'll all jump in if required in a strategic sense. So children that come through our service can have cognition and learning based work, can also access our counselling service, can also access our speech and language therapy service, all at the same time if needed, or in a staged approach so we don't bombard them. But our service is very much about, who are you? What does your best life look like? What are your gifts, skills and talents? And what can we do better to meet the needs that you've got right now? And I think in terms of special educational needs, I like the idea of the needs. But this whole thing about being special, a lot of children use it as a diss now. Oh, it's a bit special. It's a bit special. Actually, and my own teenagers do it. And I'm like, well, hold on a minute, actually. The language around that, something special is like, oh, when you go out for a fancy meal or... And it just doesn't sit right.
No, I can understand that. So let's just think about this now a bit more. So we've talked about the head teacher. And you've kind of done that overarching approach, what SEND is. So... now let's just think about then some other nitty-gritties within that. So you've talked about the code of practice, which is what schools should follow.
Absolutely, that's a statutory bit.
It's a statutory bit. And am I right in thinking that there's lots of words in there like should?
You've got your shoulds and you have regard to, and but basically the bottom line is you need to be doing what is in that document.
That's right.
It's just a fancy way of dressing it up.
And giving people interpretation.
And it's a lovely one, because when we get into the disability aspect of it, we talk about reasonable adjustments. And reasonable's really interesting, because I have days where my mood shifts incredibly, and I start off being a very reasonable human, and by the end of the day, I'm not having it, and I'm not reasonable in the slightest. But when we talk about reasonable adjustments, that depends on your setting, the practicality of what that child needs, budgets, size of school. Have I got a hearing loop? Do I need a ramp? Is it reasonable to put that in? But we get into these really big conversations, because straight away I've gone ramp, hearing loop, they're really expensive things. But actually, for me, it is about high quality adaptive teaching for children with SEN, so that they are in the classroom as far as possible with their peers learning. And that's about the small things. And for me, SEND, we think big things, legislation, tribunals, scary things, the law. But you know what? If we got the mainstream, high quality adaptive teaching right from the off, a lot of children wouldn't have the problem. So do you ever see that fancy thing where they get like, this is equality, this is equity, and this is liberation? And I was saying liberation, it's a picture of me running around with my pants on my head with nothing on. It's really cool. But that would scare people and I'd lose my job. But actually, for me, if the barrier didn't exist in the first place, we wouldn't have the issue.
If we have a level playing field, it works.
And that's about what you offer from the off. So some people go, but reasonable adjustments. And I say, well, for that little tiny human over there, you know, when you give them an instruction, give them some advance warning. In a minute, mate, this is going to be the instruction. Are you all right with that? You might have a visual that you show them. That is a reasonable adjustment. It's a small, tiny, little thing that makes a big difference.
It's fascinating, because, like, for me, being someone that has dyslexia, that has tendencies of autism, has ADHD, has them social, emotional, mental health issues, because that's what I live with every day. Actually, a reasonable adjustment can be something like actually just giving me a phone call, because it makes me a lot easier. And to me, I think that's quite reasonable, to ring someone and talk to them rather than send me a letter.
Absolutely.
We won't go into that now, but what we will I want to just kind of go back a bit and kind of... We've talked about legislation, we've talked about what SEND is, and then this you've talked a little bit about the concept of the worry of the tribunal, but there's that one bit in the middle which I would always know it was a statement, and it's now called an education, health and care plan. And where does that fit into it then?
So they are on the rise. It feels like exponentially at the moment. Numbers are going through the roof for a number of reasons, which is a whole other podcast in itself, and probably a furious podcast on my part. But for me, it's when children, we talk about SEN as when we meet the needs, we go through a graduated response.
Yeah.
So a graduated response starts off with us having a bit of a ooh moment, and us like ooh, this, when you look at your pupil data or your little humans, you look and go, this one's not quite doing what we want it to do, and what we're going to do, Marjorie. So you have this pupil progress meeting, and everyone's worried about this child. So you start with an early response. So an early response is you looking at this human and thinking, okay, what do they need? What can we do differently? What do we think's causing the problem? And we try stuff out. And at the end of this early response phase, we make a decision as to actually, was it like on a computer where you press Control, Alt and Delete and then it's all reset and it's all good? Or actually we're going back to the beginning for this one and it's going to need a lot more. So it's an ongoing, significant, persistent difficulty. So at that point, we make a decision that could be special educational needs, and we're going to have this ongoing additional to and or different from provision.
And that's when they're put on the SEND register.
Yeah, you put on the...
Which is interesting. Again, being a governor in a school, we have the SEND register. It doesn't say SEND, it says SEN in my... For some reason,
okay.
Which I thought was quite interesting. But it's still cool, but then it says SEND somewhere else.
And some schools have a SEND register, some have a SEN register, then some have a D register, some have a medical register, and then some have a register just like kids that are a bit interesting with a bit of a cough and a wooden leg. Yeah. It just starts like that. And I don't like the term registered, because it just feels like you're on the register. It just doesn't work for me.
It's going back to the pants conversation.
Absolutely.
So
we do need to know why. No, we do need to know who these children are. We do need to make sure somebody has responsibility for them and takes ownership of them. That's really important, because you get the class teacher who, well, that's one for the SENCO, and the SENCO's going, that's one for the class teacher.
Yeah, you see, that really annoys me.
Yeah, like this child is not a game of pass the parcel.
Yeah. Every child, everybody
is a teacher of SEN.
Yeah, that's the word. That's what I was looking for.
That's the one.
Every teacher is a teacher of SEN.
Absolutely. End of chat, really, on that one. So we then go through this. You're now on the register, and we go through cycles of support for that child where we assess, plan, do, review what they need. Then we might reach a point where we keep reviewing it, and under review we go, actually, we've sorted this. You no longer have those needs. Back to. Or you need to kind of stay where you are, we need to keep doing this, or actually we're really concerned and you need support that is above and beyond, again, what's typically available with the notional £6,000 budget that we've got for our school.
And the word notional is the word notional.
Absolutely.
Because not every school can find that notional budget.
And so it's above and beyond all of that. And we've exhausted everything and we're not getting anything out of this for anyone. So then we look at an education and healthcare plan. Now, that stage one is just requesting the assessment from the local authority, which for some is a minefield in itself, full of heartache and battles.
And the timeline for that is meant to be...
So it depends, because it's about getting the request agreed first of all. Okay. So you've got to get that bit.
And it's different in every local authority.
Different forms, different approach, different people, different everything. And for some of the schools that I'm working with, I can think of one in particular, they have 4 different local authorities because they are like smack bang in the middle. Oh. So their SENCO has to speak Wolverhampton, Walsall, Birmingham and Sandwell. Nice. And it is like 4 different languages. If that assessment is agreed, then the clock starts ticking and everything has to happen. But we've got a huge backlog at the minute because of the number of children and the limited resources that we've got. But when you have an education and healthcare plan, a lot of parents seek them for reassurance. And that's reassurance that, number one, their child's needs are recognised and formally documented. A lot of them have gone for a long time saying, I need this for my child, and they're not getting anything. But then we also have the issue of then the actual provision is documented and written down and recorded. So there is now a legal aspect to that, has to be fulfilled. And then we have to keep that up to date, which in itself is another difficult job to do, because it just doesn't neatly fit into those boxes. Yeah. And we have to keep it up to date in terms of, I've got children in Key Stage 2 whose EHCPs date back to early years, and it's talking about them not being toilet trained or pre-verbal, and this is a fully toilet trained verbal child who's had to have a lot of support to get to that. Yeah. And it also sets out the type of provision in terms of the setting, whether that's a specialist, mainstream, therapeutic setting, whatever. And again, just because you've got that doesn't mean you're getting it,
No.
because we then have to source those things.
Yeah.
So it's a very difficult system to get through. And that sort of is from that initial, we're worried about this, through to. And so for some children, that can be done really quickly. For other children, it takes years because we're spending a long time hypothesising, testing, gathering evidence, messing to get to where we need to get to.
I think that it's fascinating, it is, because for me that's it was difficult when I was a child and I had a statement, and the EHCP was trying to make it a bit easier, but it's probably still made it more complicated.
Yeah, and do you know what I think's happened? When you actually look at what it sets out to achieve, it's good and it's a good thing and the system looks great. But we are in a world where the resources and the implementation, I'm going to go, as my nanny Reem would say, have gone completely to cock. It ain't working.
I know, yeah.
It isn't working. And I don't think it's people being difficult. I don't think it's people being, I'm just going to make this longer. And no, they're not having it because I'm in that mood. It is because actually we haven't got the resources. It is a black hole of money that we're throwing.
Yeah.
And then we've got children with increasingly more complex needs that we're struggling to meet the needs of without the provision.
Yeah.
So I have several children in mainstream settings whose predominant need is social, emotional, mental health because they're in the wrong setting and we haven't got space for them.
And that's so true. And I think that before we finish, because we're coming up to time of this podcast that we wanted to try and set it in a certain time, but we're going to take our 25% extra time because of my disability.
Absolutely, we're going to play that card.
We are going to
Lovely.
play that. And that's probably going to come up a few times over the series of podcasts. But actually, we go back to what you said earlier about actually getting things in earlier, so early identification, early intervention.
Absolutely,
actually helps the system. And we both would agree with the phrase from Lorraine Peterson, OBE. We have a 21st century intake of students with a 19th century education system.
Agreed.
And if we actually got that fixed, we might not have.
Yeah, and I'll go one stage further after paying homage to the incredible Lorraine Peterson OBE. Is for me, actually, do you know what? If we got it right with the quality of teaching, I'm not saying they're not bad teachers, they are working so hard, they're brilliant, but they are exhausted with limited resources, with complicated children and complicated systems. If we could get the adaptive teaching right in the classroom for our children and young people, actually what we do for SEN is vital for some, but valuable for all.
Yeah, and that's true, and I think I've seen that. I think it's amazing. Now, we together, well, more you rather than me, I just produced it, we wrote a book called The Things and the Stuff, the mini guide, which is about 45 pages long, so it's not really that mini.
No. Well, it depends on what you view Maxi to be.
That's fine. And we're working on version 2 now.
We are.
So come September, we'll have version 2 out. So do check the show notes if you want to find out more about that, and there's some free resources on the website. So thank you, Beccie, for our first podcast back, and we look forward to you listening and seeing us on our next podcast. Thank you very much.
Thank you.